Welcome to this episode of Robots in Depth. Today I'm honored to have Henrik Christensen, and we're going to talk about everything in robotics like we usually do. How did you get into robotics? Tell me the beginning of this story.
So actually I used to work in computer vision. So I got my degree in computer vision, and then an opportunity came up where we got a serious amount of money and said, what would be the difference? And I said, what if we could put cameras on mobile platforms and move them around, see what's going on in the world? That would be really cool. So for that reason, we bought a mobile platform, and that's how I sort of got into robotics.
And this mobile platform was quite rudimentary compared to what we have today, I would presume.
It's very, very basic. It was a very basic platform, but it made the difference. We could get started. We could do very simple, initially mobile robot, sort of driving around in the hallways, and that was a good start.
Yeah. And where were you when you were doing this work?
So this was at Sjöborg University in Denmark. So back 1991.
What did you use the vision for?
So we were at Sjöborg University. We were using it for doing scene understanding. So we were in some of the very early EU projects. So 25, 30 years ago, and getting in and just getting started, wanted to be able to do, can we find basic navigation using vision? Can we find where are the rooms? Can we track people? We did one of the very first active vision heads. So 2 cameras moving around. That was back 91. Very interested in how could we model what humans are doing, and how could we use this to sort of drive around. So very early vision, really basic cameras, very little computing power. So we made tremendous progress the last 25 years of getting to where you can do it in real time. You can do it in megapixel cameras. We have much better mobile platforms. And it was not until I got to Stockholm that I actually got into doing sort of robot manipulation. So all of the early work was just cameras on mobile platforms.
I guess that's also limited by the technology that was available at the time. That simply was what you could do, right?
Yeah, no, it was you could only get very basic mobile platforms. It was hard to get if you bought a robot manipulator, you would have to have a seriously big room. You would have to have it behind fences. It was a huge challenge, and we just didn't have those facilities at the time.
Then you came to KTH in Stockholm, actually,
Yep.
which is my hometown.
Yeah.
Could you talk a little bit about why you ended up there and what you did when you were there?
So that was sort of an interesting opportunity. I was very much, when I was at Sjöborg University, involved in doing EU projects. And then my good friend Jan-Olof Eklund at KTH was involved with one of these strategic research foundations that Sweden was setting up on saying we want to do something very strategic in a few areas. So they managed to secure a grant on autonomous systems. And Jan-Olof called me up and said, we need a director for this center. Would you want to come to Stockholm? I was a little, as a Dane defecting to Sweden, that's a pretty big deal. But nonetheless, it was such a great opportunity, I had to go. So we built up a center that initially, from almost no existence, had people in mechanical engineering, electrical engineering, applied math, and computer science going after autonomous systems, from sort of really trying to understand the basics of autonomy, but also trying to understand how could we do early work on grasping, how could we do early work on navigation. Did a lot of work with ABB Robotics investors, did interesting work with Electrolux. So I was part of the team with Electrolux that did the first autonomous vacuum cleaner before Roomba and all of this. And we also did some healthcare work. So very broad and very interesting. And that really sort of helped get the Center for Autonomous Systems to be one of the leading institutions in Europe. At the time, it was a lot of fun. And there was, compared to Denmark, in Sweden, there's a lot of robotics companies.
Yeah.
So it was very interesting. It was much easier to build up sort of industrial relationships. I'm very adamant about we not only do interesting research, but also transform it into the real world. So that was a lot of fun.
Yeah, that's why I'm an old software developer. I did that for more than 10 years. But why I'm so excited about robotics is because it's both software and hardware, and it's out there in the real world doing actual stuff, right?
Exactly.
That's why I'm more excited about robotics than software alone.
No, exactly. And that's sort of, And that was one of the things, for instance, for what we did in the US, where we're looking at, so I'm, the title of my slide, sort of the roadmap is when the internet gets connected to the real world, we get robotics.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. We're going to be talking about the roadmaps, I'm sure.
Sure.
Because you work with the US version of the roadmap, and of course there's also European version of the roadmap.
So the first thing, so we were actually very engaged when I was at KGH in a number of EU projects, had a very large portfolio of EU projects, which they still have. And as part of this, we sat together one night and said, you know what, I really don't know what's going on in Norway. I know more about what's going on at MIT than I know what's going on in all of Norway. This is a little bit sad. And then we said, why don't we start a mailing list in Europe to try and exchange research results, all of those things. And then about a year later, the European Commission called me up and said, this is amazing that we're trying to coordinate European research. Could we sponsor you? I'm like, sure, why not? And that sort of led to the European Robotics Network. And as part of the European Robotics Network, we started writing a national robotics or a European robotics roadmap, which then led to the Cognitive Systems Program and a number of these efforts, which was very successful. And then after 10 years in Stockholm, gets dark in the winter,
Yeah,
and very depressing. So I got an offer to go to Georgia Tech, and when I came to Georgia Tech, I said, in the U.S., there's a lot of individual funding programs, but there was really no strategy overall for what's happening. So for that reason, I said it would be nice if we could come up with an overall national strategy, put together a group of somewhere around 80 people from industry and 80 people from academia, and wrote sort of a strategy looking at where are the business opportunities, why is it hard, what kind of R&D could we do that would actually impact the real world. So it was interesting. I did this first in Europe, and then I moved to the US and had an opportunity to do it again in the US.
Yeah, really cool. And now the roadmaps and keeping track of what's happening in robotics is more or less standard. I mean, we have the ERF conference that every year brings all of European robotics together, and we just share our research results, our entrepreneurial efforts, and also the input from the Commission is very important because they are keeping keeping up the very strong support they've had for robotics. It's a very big program, I understand.
It's even bigger than the US, I think, in many respects. We have the same thing in the US. So we have a what is called the PI meeting. So all of the people really get together to talk about what are the things that's been funded, what's going on, what's the future strategy. And I think these are very valuable for both in Europe and the US to really get cohesion, get people to know each other in Europe, sort of across the country boundaries, and really building a very strong community, which is very helpful. I also think it's very helpful both in Europe and the US. We have National Robotics Weeks, which is great for outreach to tell the rest of the world about all of the cool stuff that's going on in robotics, because most people have no idea.
No, and this is actually a a reason why I'm doing this interview show. I want you guys that are actually doing being part of the robot revolution, tell the real story about this straight to the general public, pretty much like Robotics Week or these PI ERF things. And I also want that to be done without a filter, without an agenda, because so much of robotics can either sound like science fiction and people don't plan or prepare for it, or it sounds scary and then they try to stop it. We should use this as an opportunity.
Absolutely. No, I'm always saying, one of my worst enemies is Hollywood.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because they put up these horror stories of Will Smith going in there, has to save mankind because a robot has gone rogue, and I'm like, yeah, that's not what it looks like. Come to my lap and I'll show you. This is, in some sense, for Hollywood, very depressing. We have much more mundane problems. But at the same time, I understand it. I understand that people are worried about, am I going to lose my job? What's going to happen to this? And we need to, as roboticists, address this and convince people that it's about empowering people. It's not about replacing people. And I think that's very important, that we have an important educational role to do. And at the same time, we are seeing tremendous progress in technology, and we are on an exponential curve, which leaves the risk that unless you continue to educate yourself, you could get marginalized. So it's important, and it's important that we get that message out there.
Yeah, and this is the same thing that's happened in any technology revolutions. One of the many we've gone through over like thousands of years. But one example I've heard is that in the early 50s there were 40,000 people going to work in New York as elevator operators.
Right.
And we probably don't have a single one today.
No.
And the world isn't worse off.
No.
You can move on and do other things.
No, and the same, on the other hand, if you look at it probably as recently as 10 years ago, most companies did not have a social media representative. Today, any company with sort of respect for itself has to have somebody that considers what is our social media profile. So we get a very different set of jobs, the same thing, but there are surprises in there. So when I started 30 years ago, when I entered the workforce, I had a secretary, and at the time I got my own computer, and she was scared stiff and said, what am I going to do now that you get your own computer? I don't have to type for you anymore. And she was a typist in a typing pool. Mm-hmm. There are more secretaries today than there were 30 years ago, but they don't type for me anymore. And
they manage the social media account instead.
Exactly, and they do all of these other things. And the same, on the other hand, I've made some mistakes in my life. I remember when I was in elementary school, and we were offered a course in typing, and I said I will never have to type in my life. And today I probably spend 6 hours a day typing on a computer. Who knows? Maybe 15 years from now we'll just be talking to the computer and we don't have to type at all. So, but there was a period in between where we all had to sort of sit in front of this. But it's also interesting. There are some surprises in terms of employment. So if I look at it, there are more bank personnel today than 10 years ago, which really surprised me because I never go to my bank. I use my cash card and I go to the ATM and I take out money. I don't think I go every year. Still there are more people in the bank. And so I asked the banking people, I said, it's because the banking sector is growing so rapidly that even though the private customers don't show up anymore, the rest of the economic system is growing so rapidly that they need more people. The hard part is to make sure that we have to have people that actually get a reasonable level of education. Which is very important, and because if you have sort of a base level of education, you can get moved to different places. And I think it's important for the future, and even for the current generation, that you need to think about lifelong learning. What you learn today, if we just look 30 years back, most of us did not have a laptop. Most of us did not even have a computer. And we didn't have computer games. There's just lots of things that we didn't have. And today, these are sort of self-evident things. 10 years ago, most people didn't have a smartphone. So it's important to do this. And it's important to realize that in most cases, we can't predict it. So like, Watson, from IBM, said that initially the world market for computers was 4. He was
quite wrong there.
He was quite wrong there. The same thing, the CEO for Compaq, when the first PC came out, said nobody would ever want to have one of those in our homes. For the Union Telegraph came out when the first phone came out and said this is not a convenient telephone or communication medium. So there's all of these really wrong predictions, and I think we have to prepare for the fact that robots are going to be pervasive in our life going forward. We're going to have them in our homes. We're going to drive driverless cars. We're going to go to get scanned for all sorts of medical diseases, buy a robot. We're going to get deliveries from Amazon and all sorts of other places by robots. So it's going to be a very pervasive part of our life. For that reason, it's also very important that we build robots that are accessible to people. Whether it's a game playing teenager that spent 15,000 hours on a game, or it's my mother who's never used a robot, we need to be able to accommodate both of them. And that's why in robotics it's very important for us to not only work on the latest technology, but also work on how do we get this technology in such a way that it can be used by regular people.
Yeah, get it out there and really be accessible, as you say.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So we see that, for instance, the vacuum cleaner have made good strides. They're quite common and they do work quite well. We also see the lawnmower robots are quite popular. And the self-driving car is making an amazing progress. We see the Tesla that's in some situation is actually driving itself. although there's still quite a way to go before we can fall asleep in the car.
So on the other hand, we are seeing people falling asleep in the car. So there
Not
was
a good idea.
No, but there was one on social media last week of this woman driving on a Californian highway, and you're seeing her, and she was, sound asleep. The Tesla was taking her down the highway. And I was like, that's a little too early.
We're not really ready for that.
We're not really ready for that. But that's all. But that's why I think it's very important, because right now Tesla is sort of saying you have to be ready to intervene at any time. People are not going to sit like this for very long. Then they're gonna get a message on SMS and go, oh yeah, I could communicate with my. So and one of the big questions there is, how do we make sure that people have context awareness? So how can I make sure that they're really in the loop? I think we're going to have some other problems about how do we make the driving natural enough that people don't get motion sick? Because so it's all of these things.
Tesla's been described as quite aggressive sometimes.
Oh, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure they're working on that. But the notion that the human should be able to, in a split second, take over the driving, that is from my point of view, the really challenging issue.
Oh yeah, no. We need to find a way of making it much smoother and find a way of doing this. On the other hand, I think it's very encouraging because it allows people, as they get older, to get access to transportation. If I'm looking at it, most of the people I know, my parents and others, are worried about that. They don't want to take a taxi whenever they have to go somewhere. They don't want to use an Uber. If I could give them a car, that would allow them to go to church and all sorts of other things without having a driver and without being in a position where they can afford or where they can have a driver's license anymore, because it might be due to eyesight, it might be due to all sorts of things that make this. It will allow them to get out of their house, have a much richer life than they have today. Same thing, having kids. I'm not happy, if I look at, I don't have kids myself, but if I had kids, I had a teenage daughter, I'm not sure I'm ready to put her in an Uber driver with, who knows what their background is. I know they do background checks and all sorts of things. Nonetheless, I would feel uncomfortable about this. A driverless car, I would feel much more comfortable.
Yeah.
Of course, I'm a roboticist. So.
Yeah, which of course should tell the people watching this something, that if you would put your own family in that self-driving car, and with your experience and knowledge, it's
safe.
That's a well-founded decision, right?
No, exactly. It's not something you do lightly. But I think we're going to see technology be such a pervasive part of our everyday life. And it's anything from helping people getting out of bed, we're getting to a place where we can do basic hygiene like shaving people, and we're almost there where we can start bathing people and things like this. So we can give almost any function from the time you get up all the way, and soon I'm sure we'll get robotic beds that will modulate its functions out during the night so that you don't lie in the same position. They make sure you get the right sleep. At Georgia Tech, we worked with a person from California, Henry Evans, on he's paralyzed from the neck down. So he wanted to get a robot. He saw one of my colleagues, Charlie Kemp, on CNN. So he called up Charlie and said, Charlie, you need to help me. And he was paralyzed from the neck down, so we were like, okay, this is going to be complicated stuff. And he said, I'd like to get a robot that allows me to scratch myself when I have an itch.
So, such a fundamental thing for you and me, but...
Exactly, but for him, having to call on his wife and said, I really... that's a big deal. So we gave him a robot that could allow him to scratch himself, and then said, if you can do this, can you shave me? I'm very unhappy about how my wife shaves me, so if I could do this myself, I would be much, much happier. So we gave him a robot that would allow him to shave himself, and then said, it would be great if I could get a robot that would allow me to feed myself. Because, my wife is my primary caregiver. This is a huge time commitment for her. If I could feed myself, she would be able to free up, have both some personal time, but also be able to do a lot of other things. So for her, this was a big deal, and for him, it's a big deal. He now had a little bit of independence, whereas before he was totally relying on her for all of his functions. These are small steps, but makes a huge difference for these people.
Yeah, and you mentioned that the wife of this person was the primary caregiver. What we gain here is two very important things when robotics can take over some of these tasks. She gains time, he gains independence, and they also get the relationship back, because she can transfer back into being his wife rather than to being his prime caregiver.
Exactly.
And those three things are fundamentally super important.
No, it's very, very important. And we're seeing this, and at the same time, the price is coming down to a level where we can give this to people. And the same, we see people as they get older, they have a hard time cleaning their apartments, they have a lot of things. And still, they would like to have a clean apartment because when they have guests, they don't want to sort of, there's dust in the corners and things like that. So giving them this quality of life is going to be very important, and we are in a situation where the demographics is moving in such a way we're going to get more and more elderly people.
Yeah, and I'm going to be an old person. I'm certainly want to use this technology when I'm old. So.
Not exactly. I've said all along, I would like to see technology progress to a level where by the time I retire, I would have a robot that would allow me to get out of bed, take a shower, get dressed, prepare a meal, without having to rely on other people. I still want to associate with other people, but I want to do this in a social context rather than them showing up purely to service me for my daily needs.
Freeing up again the people to form a personal bond with a person rather than, in quote, using that to just take care of the basics.
Exactly.
And I really want the pace of technology to be such that my independence, as it goes down over the coming many years, I hope, technology actually keeps up with it and keeps the curve neutral.
And I'm convinced, by the time I retire, I will have an autonomous driving car that would allow me to still move around and go on vacations and all sorts of things. So I agree. We should, and I think we will see this. But the big challenge is going to be, how do we make sure that it not only is accessible to you and I, who are technologically very well sort of integrated, using a lot of advanced technology. I want people that have never used a computer to be able to use this technology. But on the other hand, I would also like to be able so that it's even fun for a 14-year-old kid that has sort of played 10,000 hours of computer games to feel it. So I would like to have a knob I can sort of move on saying novice, expert, and over time, as you feel more and more confident, it follows you. Ideally, it should learn what is your usage pattern and be able to use this so that all the time it's moving you in the right direction.
Yeah, but that's a very, very interesting thing. And I also think that I've heard that from when we test robots out there, especially for the elderly. As you mentioned, keeping your home clean is a fundamental task that people want to do. And what I understand that when they use robots to do this, they feel that they are doing it. They are doing it together with the robot, rather than having somebody else do it for them. That the robot is doing 99% of the work. They are still doing it together with the robot, much as they did with a regular vacuum cleaner.
Not exactly. So it gives them the independence. It allows them to do, and you're doing it on their schedule. It's not like I have to be home from 9 to 10 because somebody from home care is coming to clean my apartment. Now they get to do it, and so it gives them much higher satisfaction.
Yeah. So we talked about self-driving cars, we talked about robots in the home. You have a very unique, deep perspective of robotics as a whole. Where do you see other areas that is about to become possible? What are the viewers going to watch out for and wait for in the coming 2 to 5 years or something like that?
Well, so I think we'll see the traditional application of robotics has been in manufacturing. I think it'll continue to be in manufacturing. I think it'll be very much in supply chain. So in terms of delivering things to people, delivering things to factories. So I think we're going to see a revolution in Amazon. Already today, we are almost getting to the level where books get printed in a storage facility very close to where you live, and then they basically put the cover on it and they send it to you. So you can order a book and they start printing it as soon as you press the buy button, and within an hour it will actually get delivered to you. I think we'll see much more of this, where material gets delivered. It will be produced locally, not in China or not in some other country, but very, very close to you. And I sort of see the long-term evolution is that we'll put the printer in the back of the truck. So as it's on its way to you, it will print it and put the cover on, and it will be fresh off the press when they pick it up and get it to you. I think we'll see this with food. I think we'll see this very quickly, and I think we'll get to a point where we might have food that has never been touched by humans. Because we've seen these infections, people have a cold, they have a flu, they have all of these things. With this, I can now guarantee much better food quality. We can track it much better.
You can reduce waste because people drop apples and stuff
Exactly.
like that. And if we waste the food towards the end of the chain, we've added a lot of environmental impact, and then suddenly nobody
and
eats
lost
it.
a lot of money.
Yeah.
So it'll reduce the overall cost of this. So I think we will very much move manufacturing away from mass manufacturing, far away from where you are, move manufacturing much closer where it is today. That will move jobs away from these foreign countries and back very close to where you are. I think we'll see much higher degrees of automation in using car factories to get this down, and all sorts of things. So I think manufacturing is going to go through a revolution. I think the supply chain is going to go through a revolution. So already today, in a number of big cities, you have Amazon Express or Amazon Prime, where you can order something and they will deliver it within an hour. And this can even be very exotic products. So recently I bought a very high-end Nikon camera. There were only supposed to be 10 of them in the US. I pressed, and within an hour they knocked on my door and they said, "Here you go." And I was like, damn. So we're getting there in terms of doing this for all sorts of products. I think the same we will see. We'll start seeing for instance, for clothing, that you will be able to go into a dressing room and it will scan your 3D body shape and it will sew clothing to your shape. So you don't have to buy a pair of jeans and they're in a particular size factor and this is what they are, and you're like, yeah, it's not quite what I wanted, or a shirt or something like that. We're already starting to see this now in the US, where you can take a cell phone and you can take a picture of yourself with no shirt on, and then it will sew a shirt that's a perfect fit to your shape.
And then that brings us to mass customization. Instead of one thing for many, you have one thing for you.
Exactly.
And also the fact that we're also only producing what people actually buy and want.
Right.
This is going to drive costs down, it's going to drive environmental impact down, and it's just going to make everything so much more efficient.
Right? Not exactly. But I think that. So I think we'll see it in manufacturing. We'll get this mass customization. Already today, Audi is making more than 6 million different configurations of the A3. Jaguar is making more than 1 million different configurations of the Jaguar. So we're seeing all of these cars getting mass customization. I think we'll see it in clothing. I think we'll start to see it in food. So people have various kinds of allergies and say, well, I'm sensitive to this. You will get it made. So it's fully customized to you. And then I think we'll see it in all sorts of deliveries in terms of transportation. We'll see it in healthcare. We'll certainly see it in all sorts of outdoor environmental. So I think we can do much better cleanup of this. So overall, we're getting a world that is much more automated. The other area that I think we'll get it in is we'll get it in entertainment. So we'll get robots that will help us have fun, for play, for this. Already today, Lego and Universal Studios have robo coasters. So it's a robot where the 2 seats at the end of the arm, and we can move it around. So now you're getting a roller coaster, and you tell me how sort of risky are you? Do you want the scary one or the easy one?
Yeah.
And then it'll do different kinds of motions. This will come to our homes. So we'll start to see much more entertainment. And the nice thing is that this might actually be one of the first areas where we get it. Because we have a very non-rational relationship to toys. We're willing to pay much more money to get sort of a fun experience than we are. If I look at something like vacuuming, I'm going to say, how many hours am I vacuuming a year? Okay, what's it worth to me? How much money am I going to pay? So we're very rational about what a vacuum cleaner can cost. A toy, the sky is the limit.
Yeah, everybody that's ever owned a sailboat knows that.
Oh, yeah, not exactly.
That stuff is expensive because they know we're going to pay for it anyway, right?
Well, and it's not like when you buy a sailboat or, I have a very high-end car, I could get by with a Mini or something like that, and it would be much, much cheaper. But instead, I'm paying for this, and it's not like I'm sitting there, how many hours am I in my car? What's it worth to me? it's fun, I'm willing to pay. And so there, I think also with robotics, we're going to get a number of things that will help us get entertainment.
Yeah, and I love playing. I have the access to a number of small robotics kits, and it's so much fun to build stuff. And it's so much fun to bring them out to people and build stuff together with them. So I'm thinking that's a social thing too.
No, but also, and it's a very important tool also for doing education.
Yes, absolutely.
So I just saw here at Robo Business a bunch of kids that have designed a stand for bicycles. This was a bunch of fourth graders that had come up with a design for how to do a bike stand, how to build in sort of computing into it so that you would park your bike, it would scan on your phone. If somebody else unlocked it, it would come up with a message on your phone saying somebody's trying to steal your bike. And it was built in so that there was a stand for putting in your biking helmet. There's a mirror so that the girls could set their hair and all of this. These are fourth graders, it's unbelievable,
Yeah, we really have to work hard as old geezers to stay ahead, right?
No, so but it's great. They are learning already early on how to do programming, how to integrate the technology into their everyday life, how to start making money, how to really think about it. This is amazing, This is and this is now they've learned about calculating, programming, language, design. These are all core skills to learn for the rest of your life. And the fact that they started this as fourth graders, I'm just like, wow.
Yeah, imagine a fourth grader doing that. Yeah. So they're probably like 10, 12 years old.
So yeah, 10, 11 years old.
Yeah, that's amazing. And they're building automated solutions, right?
No, exactly. And they're starting to start a company.
Yeah.
I'm like...
and this is what robotic enables. Yeah. I mean, this if you're out there listening to this, I'm thinking both you and I can say that this is the stuff robotics enables.
Yeah.
And this is real. This is actually happening.
So cool.
Yeah.
Same is. So I'm seeing it it's starting to be international, but for the longest time there's been a competition in the US called the US First competition. So it's a robotics competition. Now it's available from anywhere from kindergarten to high school kids. And I'm engaged with the high school kids. Every year they get a mission the first Saturday in January. Then they have 6 weeks to build a robot. This year they had to build a robot that could conquer a fortress. So they had to be able to shoot balls, so sort of like cannonballs. They had to be able to climb the walls. 6 weeks, They started out with this very basic stuff, got it all the way, and then people are saying, well, that's just robotics. There's a lot of kids that won't be interested. No, it's not. So it's really about how do you get 25 high school kids to work together to be able to build this robot. They have to go out and get funding, have to be able to present their ideas. They have to have the engineers that can actually build it. They have to have a logistics team that can take them to the various contests. And then finally, they have to have a management team that can bring all of this together. So it's like starting a small company.
Yeah.
As
actually a mid-sized company. Yeah, mid-sized company. 25 people.
Yeah, no. So and then they go out and they do this. And the ones that win the regional contest are guaranteed a scholarship to go to university. That's a pretty big deal.
Yeah,
that you guarantee. This is a way of guaranteeing that you can get an affordable education. So whether you're from a rich home or from a poor home, this if you have the energy and the drive, you can be a success.
Yeah, and it's really important that we get this into the hands of the kids early, because we see that with computers, that the kids that had access to them early, and I was fortunate enough to have that, and I really feel that I have a different understanding what computers can do and what they can't do, and what takes a long time and what could be done reasonably easy, as opposed to my friends that didn't have access to a computer in the same way. So I'm thinking if you can put your kids in contact with robotics, that's something that you should absolutely take the opportunity to do.
And it doesn't cost that much money to get started.
No.
You can get started, for less than 1,000 kroners and actually do something, or $100, and get something that you can get started with very little, and you can do amazing things. And typically it will inspire the kids to really go and do, and it helps them with math, it helps them with programming, and so there's a lot of ways that this would be very valuable. But I think that's important that we also embrace it, so that as the kids get robotics technology as they grow up, they would not be scared of it. They're going to embrace it and say, oh, this can help me.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anywhere from vacuuming your kid's room to all sorts of new toys.
Yeah, because this actually bridges very nicely to a very big trend today, which is co-robotics, where people and robotics combine, because especially when it comes to artificial intelligence, humans are still enormously flexible.
Right.
And also when it comes to dexterity of our hands, the robotics manipulation is not at par or won't be at par with humans for a very long time. So, and being not afraid of robots, understanding robots will really bridge to the co-robotic scene very nicely.
Right.
Could you talk a little bit about the co-robotic scene? What's your view about how are we going to interact and work with robotics for a single task?
Right. So I think the traditionally we've had robots behind the fence. It was not safe to be around them. And now we actually have a safety standard that specifies how humans and robots can interact for tasks. How hard can they collide? When do the robots have to stop? What are all of those? So that you no longer need to have a fence, you can collaborate. The best example I had was, when I was in Sweden, Volvo approached us and said, we would like to build a robot that would help sort our mail. About 10% of the mail we get every day is mislabeled. So people say, there's nobody in room 334, that's Olsen, so where is this person? And they said, could you build a robot? So we would like, as an employer, to embrace diversity and integration into the workplace. So they were imagining they would have a person that was mobility impaired in this position that would be able to sort the mail, and this would be a way for them to sort of embrace a broader set of people. And the safety guy showed up and said, no, you can't put a robot next to this person. We won't allow this. I'm like, really? Now with the co-robots, we actually are in a situation where a robot can work with humans on solving specific tasks. So we can do so the first level is you can put humans and robots in the same space, and it's considered safe. We know how hard you can hit each other, which is sort of one level of co-robot, that there's simply coexistence. The next one is to be able to have a robot that helps you solve tasks. So this could be heavy lifting. It's too heavy, so if you did it as a person, you would ruin your neck or ruin your elbow and your shoulder. So instead, they can now go in and do the heavy lifting. You still guide it to be the right place, but it enforces you to be sort of a stronger person. You're not ruining your economics. So right now I was at a big slaughterhouse about a week ago, and I saw these people, and they're very unergonomic tasks to be done. Those we're getting replaced by humans that can still be guiding the robot, but it's doing all the hard work.
Making all of us superheroes, basically.
No, exactly, making all of us superheroes, so we can all be Iron Man in some sense with this. But the other one is then to get to robots that are truly collaborative, that works with us on solving tasks. Where so the best example I have is, we're building a robot at Georgia Tech that allows the robot to help me prepare a meal. So that I give the robot the recipe and say, we're going to make Swedish meatballs with mashed potatoes. I will start peeling the potatoes and it'll say, oh, let me go and pick up the meat. And it will, heat up the meat so that, and then, I'll start cooking the potatoes. I'll start on the meatballs, and then, it'll come and say, I can see you're busy with the meatballs. Let me mash the potatoes for you. So the fact that we are collaborating on solving a task, but I didn't have to program it very detailed. Instead, I would be able to give it basically the recipe, and it understands, what are you doing, what can I do? So we're really collaborating. So it would be like having another person in the kitchen while we did this.
Very interesting. That's also very close cooperation.
And you can imagine, on a weekday, you're on your way home, you're stuck in traffic, you use your cell phone to sort of say, we're going to have, pasta bolognese tonight, and it'll do it. And the same you can imagine for a lot of elderly people that might not want to cook anymore, having a robot that would actually allow you to do this. But every now and again they said, no, I really want to be able to participate in this. So there we're seeing co-robots, and traditional robotics grows on the average 15% a year. Co-robots grow somewhere around 60 to 70% a year, because that's where the next big revolution is going to be. It's really going to be about robots that empower people to do things that they otherwise have a hard time doing, either because they run out of time or they lose their capability or they're not strong enough. This is where the next revolution will be. But it also opens up for new economies. So imagine now that you're a very good chef. You can imagine that you put together a recipe for how robot can do this, and now you'll almost get to iTunes, where you can start selling robot recipes there. So you can now have private people that become very good at using their robot, and they're going to sell them that this is Henrik's pasta bolognese, and then I get a little bit of money every time people use my recipe for doing this.
Yeah.
So it opens up for a very different economy.
That's why I love being in robotics.
Right.
So seeing all of this from fourth graders building companies to us being mobile when we're older, giving an arm back to a guy that lacks one. Robotics is an amazing field, and it's been so nice to hear from you what's going on, and hopefully we'll have you on the show in the future to share even more revolutionary
I'll
things.
be happy to.
Thank you for taking the time to do an interview.
Absolutely.
This episode is sponsored by Aptomica. Everything you need in modular robotics. Or robots up close, what's going on in robotics, online and on the road. If you like this interview, don't forget to subscribe, follow us on Twitter, and subscribe to our email newsletter on robotsinDepth.com. You can also support the show on Patreon.